Hello viewers, thank you for tuning in today to watch this video. Today before work I'm actually going to record a response video to a commenter on my AnarchoCapitalist video because there are some very good points I'd like to clarify here. I do very much appreciate this commenter, but I fundamentally disagree with him on a few issues and I'd like to elaborate on that. So I'll just jump in here. The commenter Minder6 says, if you think anarcho-capitalism is a materialistic philosophy, then you're going to have to read a few more books to understand it, because that's a classic nonsense straw man. I do fundamentally think anarcho-capitalism is materialistic, and I don't think it's a straw man, so I wanted to tease this out a bit. I said, could you elaborate slightly? And they said, the ANCAP philosophy is based on self-ownership and the NAP, which results in all actions being voluntary, otherwise you're logically pro-slavery. The NAP stands for the non-aggression principle, which ANCAPs and libertarians take very seriously. And they also have a concept of negative and positive rights, which we can get into. It continues to say, materialism has two general rhetorical uses, one being that material possessions are more important than spiritual values, and the other that nothing exists except matter. Usually it is the former that is being used and equated with consumerism of sorts. Does liberty tend to generate more wealth? Yes. Is it the goal of liberty? No. The goal is simply to not be a slave. The second is pretty simple to dispel too, because no ANCAP thinks natural rights are materialistic. I want to pause here. First I want to say the commenter did hit the nail on the head when they said materialism has two general rhetorical uses, one being that material possessions are more important than spiritual values, and the other that nothing exists except matter. I was using it in both of those terms. I was using it rhetorically in the first case to imply that the philosophy is materialistic and that it ultimately places it's a rationale for consumerism by basically placing more value on physical stuff and money than spiritual values. I do think that's true, and I was using it in that rhetorical way. But then it is also a technical term, materialism, as opposed to idealism, which is the idea that the all materialist, like the Communist Manifesto, for example, by Marx, is a very materialistic document. It basically rejects the spiritual world and says like the world is a material thing, consciousness is it implies that the human soul is a byproduct of the physical world somehow, and that that basically it's a physical reality. This is contrasted, for example, last night I recorded myself reading from The Doctrine of Fascism by Mussolini, which very clearly as a manifesto states in the very beginning this is a spiritual movement by definition. You can say that ANCAPitalism can be a means to an end to help people achieve spiritual ends or live a spiritual life or something, but it isn't fundamentally declared as being anything like that, which to the commenter's credit they acknowledge that. But what I'm saying is that it's a materialistic philosophy, and it does essentially focus primarily on money. And the commenter says, ANCAPitalism is a philosophy that deals predominantly with morality. Austrian economics deals with the results, which is what you're potentially charging here, i.e. higher standard of living, however one defines it for oneself. Rothbard wrote about both, so it is often difficult to see a distinction. Pause. It is a moral, this does become a moral issue. The reason I recommended this in a recent book about moral psychology is because morality itself is a tricky subject because we all have different kind of moral matrix. There are most research until Jonathan Haidt was breaking things down into a liberal conservative binary, basically, because there are literally different personality traits that tend to correlate with liberals and conservatives. Haidt introduced more research that showed that there's a personality profile of libertarians too, which extends to ANCAPs. So an ANCAP morality system is different than my kind of morality, but ultimately this idea that ANCAP is a philosophy that deals predominantly with morality, not really. When you get I also brought up things like Rand and objectivism, which aren't directly part of ANCAPitalism, but it's because there is no metaphysical component to ANCAPitalism that literally posits that there's a higher value than the material. And I'm going to get into some real world examples in my own life and in a national context to highlight kind of why I think this is important. But if this person can I'm open to like being shown something I haven't read yet by any of these thinkers, especially Rothbard, that would infer some kind of non-materialistic morality behind it. He says, I would highly recommend reading more of Rothbard's work or get into hobby. Okay, I've read a few Rothbard books. Which ones are you talking about? Because I have a pretty clear understanding of this so far, and I'm not seeing where the spiritual part comes in. Hobby is really interesting because he wrote Democracy, the God That Failed. I've watched YouTube videos of him. I like him. I'm not an expert on him, so I don't want to get into a debate about him. But my understanding was that he'd essentially evolved beyond libertarianism because in Democracy, the God That Fails, he's comparing democracy with monarchy and coming out, he does a bunch of economic analysis and stuff, which I'm a bit hazy on, and then his conclusion is that monarchy is better, which is counterintuitive to most people for a bunch of reasons, which are very interesting. Kingdoms, I've gone through such a cycle of growth and development of my intellectual opinions that it's funny that I started off similar to being an ANCAP, like I said, but now I just find this to be very silly in many ways. So yeah, so far I'm just saying that I do think that this is a materialistic philosophy. I haven't come into any actual arguments that argue against that yet. He says there are almost 2,000 mentions of the word materialism on Mises.org. I'd recommend reading some of those articles and dispel this notion, at least for yourself. I will try to look into this, but I need you to elaborate more because I think we're basically just disagreeing on how to interpret the philosophy, not what the philosophy is. I say I appreciate the elaboration. Of course, I'm aware of the fact that materialism doesn't have a very precise definition. However, I think both of the rhetorical devices you identified are correct. I'm just going to jump forward a little bit just in the sake of time to get to the points. So I make a couple of points. One, I think that anarcho-capitalism is a fringe theory that isn't applicable on a large scale for mass society, and I think that the status quo knows that, and they like to promote it through astroturfing because it's just a way to keep people from going towards the things that would be a threat to the status quo, like collectivism and things like that. I also think that the non-aggression principle is just something that it's airy-fairy. It's like it's not a real thing. You can make up a right to believe that you have a God-given right to anything, but unless there's something to enforce those rights, they're just an abstract concept. So in my opinion now, the state exists as the collective wills, as an extension of the collective group will and what they want the morality to be, and then they have rights that they agree upon, and they use the state to enforce those rights. So I see the state as a means of freedom. The opposite of that is having no state, where you have basically pure primitivism, and that's just might makes right. Literally on a primitive level, it's just, you know, the tyrants tend to rule, or on a bigger technological level, it's just mega corporations rule. Either way, this obsession that libertarians and ANCAPs have with like the non-aggression principle. Well, I did not to say that I myself like fundamentally disagree with that, because I don't aggress against people typically. They have. There is actually a gray area here, but yeah, like I mind my own business. I work an honest job doing labor, as I've clarified. I'm content. Like I worry about my own business. I have all of these values that libertarianism springs from, but I've also learned that other people in the world are generally not like me, and they don't have those values. This is also very important. Back to psychology. I have talked about this book so many times over the years. Why Beautiful People Have More Daughters. This is important because it talks about specifically why national movements they don't go away. Something I want to say is ANCAP philosophy, it's a white guy thing. It's a Jewish thing and a white guy thing. Those are the people that are into it, basically. And the thing about this is that white guys or Europeans have evolved to be more, much more individualistic than other groups, which is why this ideology attracts that type of mentality. So thinking that the world in general or other groups of people are going to adapt this instead of having a collectivism is the norm for human beings. That's, you know, look at China, look at Islam, look at any empire, look at the West, Rome, Greece. These are collectivist efforts. These are not the results of individualist projects. And yes, ANCAP philosophy is the ultimate individualism. Like I don't understand why that's controversial, because you're literally getting rid of all of the structure that would have you grouped together in any kind of culture. It's just the bare bones, just basically money. And the problem I have with this also, as you get into, unless you're using pure Bitcoin, I have issues with this, because like if you have a pure decentralized currency and you do all your business outside of a nation state in your own territory and you use Bitcoin, I'm fine with that. But if you're living in a nation like Canada and you use Canadian currency for all your business, then especially if you're exporting that money out of our local economy internationally, I do take issue with that, which I'll get into. Lander responded to me, said, who put forth the idea that capitalism is the means to an end to supply the things needed for a fulfilled spiritual life? That's sort of me, like, I apologize if I misinterpreted your argument. I'm not sure how you're getting at capitalism being spiritual. If it's not literally spiritual, then I am misunderstanding your point. Commenter goes on, I am not an objectivist as defined by Rand, and I disagree with plenty of her thesis. She was not an ANCAP. No one in the Austrian school of ANCAP ideology assumes that economic growth is infinite. In fact, ANCAPs accept the notion that all resources are finite. Yes and no. If you're talking about, okay, this is the thing about capitalism. If you're endorsing modern capitalism as an ism, then you are endorsing a system overall that is unsustainable and does rely on and assume infinite growth. I understand, like Thomas Sowell and Hazlitt in Basic Economics and these guys, they do understand, like American conservative politics to a degree does understand finite resources and try to talk about that, but I evolved beyond that too once I understand how much of a fucking scam like modern centralized banking is, fractional reserve banking, because it all becomes just it's not, you know, whenever banks really fuck up, they just get bailouts anyway, and everything just, like, it becomes corrupt and everyone just gets bailed out basically. But in theory, things are finite. ANCAPs kind of, to a degree, acknowledge that. I mean, they acknowledge that and they write, there are books about it. How would I get at this? But I think there's just, their theories overall are flawed, and then they're still couched inside of capitalism as an ism, which isn't sustainable. By the way, and this is something I didn't understand for a long time, and I'm still trying to help my friends understand, capitalism as an ism isn't something that isn't synonymous with trade and possession rights, or something that we've always been doing. Yes, we've always worked, and not always, like for thousands of years, human beings have performed labor, and then, you know, picked apples, and then gone to market and traded their apples for some other produce that someone else had, and they have an excess of whatever, and they trade that, and there's a surplus, and, you know, that basic form of trade, that isn't what is meant by modern capitalism as an ism. Modern capitalism is a contingent phenomenon that started around the 1700s, where certain people started to get enough surplus of resources where they could buy monopolies on the means of production and basically set up a certain system of capitalism, which does assume infinite growth, which is not couched inside any other metaphysics, so it doesn't value the environment or even human life. You know, mega corporations are a bad idea. I'm excited because I might get to do an interview with the Love, Life, and Anarchy guy, and I think it'd be a really good conversation, especially after I talk with Cultured Thug and Tim Moen. But basically, I'm curious how, like, I love cyberpunk as a genre, like movies and comic books and video games and stuff. The mega corporations are always the bad guys, so I don't understand how some people can absorb all of this and not understand that the mega corporations are basically always bad. Look at the modern billionaires right now that are absorbing everything. You've got Elon Musk, who's kind of like Tony Stark, and you could see how he'd be kind of hip, but all the rest of them are like are supervillains, right? Like Bill Gates, Bezos looks kind of like Lex Luthor. Like these are capitalists at the highest stage of the game, conglomerating all their wealth, and they're gonna have like ultimate power in a neo-feudalist state. By the way, if Ancapistan ever came to be, that would just be a system that was a system of a process of transforming society into a giant neo-feudal state. That's all that would be. And getting down to free market, like there's a lot more. I don't want this video to drag on forever because I haven't even got some more important points. But this is just something I very strongly disagree on. This commenter says, rights exist whether you know them or not. Natural laws logically deduced. NAP is a principle, yes. If you own your body, you have a right not to be enslaved. Otherwise, slavery ceases to exist. That's how this works. The fact that the state ignores this means that it is immoral. The state is necessarily slavery. If you believe rights come from the state, then you're missing something, especially since the state pretends it got its rights from us, the people. I fundamentally disagree with you. Rights don't exist whether you know them or not. Laws like gravity and physics apply to you whether or not you believe in them. Something like the NAP, if someone else doesn't value it, it doesn't apply to them. Look at North America. There were a whole bunch of Aboriginal groups here that were nations. They didn't have a nation state. Europeans came, colonized the land. They just took it. Like other collectivist groups will always work that way, and they will take things, and you have to be able to defend your stuff. And might makes right. I don't mean to say that might is right, because I am a spiritual person and I do believe in my own morality, but I mean in the practical world, might makes right. And so this is the same in my martial arts philosophy. Like, being a good person is very important, but you have to be able to enforce your morality, because if someone else can dominate you, then they dictate morality. And so this idea of rights existing in a void outside of the state, I don't agree with that. They're just abstract concepts at that point. The state is not, but states can absolutely descend into tyrannism all the time, tyranny, and become tyrannical and are horrible, but there's also been a lot of cases where states have worked well for people. It's like a gun, you know, it's a tool, it can be good or bad. The state, he says, is necessarily slavery. The state is not necessarily slavery. Can become slavery, obviously. And this is, again, never heard of any ANCAP refer to the NAP as something taken seriously by anyone else, because I'd previously said the NAP isn't something that other people take seriously. And he says we do live in a real world. If you're conceding my point that other people outside of what the ANCAP circle or libertarians don't take the NAP seriously, then you're conceding my point. They don't take it seriously, so it doesn't matter. They will aggress upon you. And you can't stand up to collectivism as an individual. Islam, for example, which I don't have a problem. I actually I've grown to respect a lot of Islam, but all these sort of collectivist groups that you don't like, you're not going to oppose them, and you're not going to have any culture either. There's so I don't want to digress too much. I had responded a bit. What did I say? Okay, I'd also made this point about capitalists propping up Austrian school thinkers, and the commenters say, like, who in the general public is what I mean by this is capitalist astroturf things. So they fund things behind the scenes, so you don't realize who's funding events, and they like Jordan Peterson as a product, for example. That's why Peterson's YouTube videos play after nationalist videos on YouTube as a sort of a counter. It's all algorithmically calculated, and it's all consciously done as a type of manufacturing social opinion. So and capitalism is not a threat to the status quo like big major neoliberalism and stuff, and it actually helps it. It helps its process of opening up markets, reducing traditionalism, getting rid of people's national identities, and creating one giant open consumer market. So they like to kind of promote that by astroturfing niche stuff. Not to say that like they're teaching this stuff in school en masse, or that anyone in the intelligentsia or in business use it. Nobody takes Austrian school economics seriously, really, outside of this fringe community. But the reason that people like me and other people find this stuff online on YouTube, and why these events are held, and they get funding to have these things that promote like Milton Friedman's ideas and stuff, is to keep a segment of the population in that line of thinking. One of the reasons why I really find the photo of myself and Jordan Peterson with the Pepe the Frog flag that became so infamous for him for a while, the reason why I think that's such an icon, there's so much symbology in that one photo, and I love it.